Okay, so chapter 37 begins in 1952 and it's supposed to end in 1960. Now, this being said, that's also the dead center of America's largest and most prosperous era in history. Now, you have President Dwight Eisenhower, who you who did some interesting things for the country as on his own. But what I found really interesting is how you have all the women who during the war, I guess, so 1942 to 1945, when the U.S. became involved, most of them returned back to normal civilian lives. They stopped working, a lot of them. And I just find that very interesting that when you think about that, all these women who got so used to working and doing things on their own, making money for themselves and their family, and then they went back to basically a kind of an old world type of thing where the woman stays at home and the man goes to work. And I just find that very interesting, and just how and why this actually happened is just kind of, in my opinion, strange. Just how to kind of tell people to give that up. Now, that wasn't the case for everyone, as later on the feminine mystique was written, and that actually basically launched the largest feminist movement now. And so, and that was basically stating that, why should the women have to stay at home and sit back and do things that, it wasn't necessary. Now, Dwight Eisenhower also was the one who instigated the interstate highway system. And so this is in this era between the 1950 to 1960 is when people are really moving from place to place. You have, and this is where you first see like the fast food industries and motels and all this other kind of thing, so that people could kind of just get up and go somewhere, not have to really worry too much. And so this is also when you have the formation of the McDonald's company, and so the hamburgers, and now it was so cheap for things like that at this point in time, and that was just because everybody wanted to be able to travel and not have to worry too much, so they wanted everybody to move, and that's how we get the term actually motel. It was motor hotel, and then later shortened to motel, and originally there weren't really many differences between one or the other, but now, as you can see, in most modern places, you can see there's a very large difference between a motel and a hotel. You also have the creation of rock and roll during the era with the incoming of Elvis Presley. You have a huge change occurring in that, and how beforehand you would never see anybody move their hips in public or anything like that, and then it just shows how the time changed and how he was instigating change just through music. He was able to instigate a huge change in culture and the population, and how most people whose values were formed before World War II, it was the devil's music. It was bad. It was horrible music, and there was poisoning the youth is what everybody thought. But that isn't always the case. It was just he was forming a change that then later on led to an entirely different genre of music. And then you also have what I find actually interesting is we still, even after all this time and all this work, and we have the black army officers actually serving their country during World War II, we still go back and put in Jim Crow laws. Some of these officers and a lot of these officers were really good men, fought very hard, did really great things for the country in the war, and they still weren't treated like heroes when they came home. They were treated as they came back. That's okay, I guess. Might as well. And they're still not equal to us, even though they served alongside white men just as equals in the army during World War II. And we still have the whole separate entrances for everybody. And it's just I've never been able to understand this. Is why you would do. I know it's because nobody wants their ideas really changed or rattled, and nobody likes change too much. This is just, in my opinion, ridiculous that this went on, and it's just no one. It was separate, but really not equal. It was everybody, blacks had different entrances to go into movie theaters. There were different public drinking fountains. You had to sit in a different part of the bus, and all this stuff happened. And it's not until Martin Luther King came on about 10 years later that, about anywhere between, from whatever part of the chapter you're in, about 5 to 10 years later, to go and change this with the civil rights movement. And even then, it was still very difficult to try and make this change. So, and that's just something that I find very interesting. That what even it was, they said separate but equal, but in reality no one was actually equal. It was like, we're going to tell you that to make ourselves feel better, but you're not really still equal to us. So and that's all I got.